Maayad ha adlaw sa inyo alan. We are the Group 5 and this presentation will tackle about dispossession through state-sponsored war extinction from the book of Professor Alamon on the War of Extinction. In this section of the book, it provides the historical and recent account about the plight of the Lumad in order to bolster the strength of the dominant political and economic order of the colonial government, in other terms, an elite-led democracy. Problems of resettlement program. There are many causes that help achieve the goals of these migrants, but the most organized and consistent with this is the Philippine state. And one of the things that they did in order to achieve these goals imposing the resettlement program. This program created the conditions that would make the local economy adapt to this new order together with the police and army. And when these migrant settlers faced resistance from the original inhabitants of that land, the state will take the migrant side as both sides are of the same origins. Therefore, this indicates that the entry of formal structures of governance in many parts of Mindanao was imposed to the indigenous Moro communities. The state is an occupying force that appropriates the indigenous communities' resources, modify their local economy, and may apply violence in doing so. Throughout the regime of logging, cattle raising, plantations, and mining, these communities experience displacement and violence courtesy of the state's system. As a primary conduit of colonial interest at its emergence, the Philippine state was characterized by the practice of accommodating the goals of their American masters through the maintenance of the same Spanish political and economic elite. Despite the promise of modernization and liberation for the Filipinos, the Americans did not improve the conditions of the Lumad but made their conditions worse and appropriated their ancestral domains. And the Philippine state still maintained its colonial character arising from a feudal base where a landlord class dominates.
The existing Spanish mestizo landed class maintained their ownership and control of land and thus enjoyed the feudal advantages of having a peasant class generating income from their land and labor. Neither was the situation made better for the hordes of migrant settlers who moved to the new frontier that was Mindanao. A section of the migrant peasants who cornered homestead lots played the role of being masters to other migrants. They played the role of being protectors to the new homesteaders versus the more resistance to their encroachment and soon became the political warlords and landlords who have been dominating the economy and the politics of former Moro lands. In other words, the Americans made use of the same landed political leadership from the Spanish era, give or take a few changes owing to conflicting interests and the effect of their settlement program to do their bidding. By maintaining the economic structure of feudal Philippine society, the Americans also established a Philippine state that had the same landlord class at the helm that held a predatory desire for the land and resources to benefit themselves and their colonial masters. According to the study of Simbulan about the nature of the Philippine ruling class from 1946 to 1963 identifies the longevity of the landlord-tenant relationship that was at the base of the Philippine state during the American colonial period. Not only did the Americans break it down, but they instead encouraged for its growth. As a consequence, the cultural practice of bossism, borrowed from the cacique relations of former Spanish colonies, became even more embedded in the workings of the Philippine state. This tendency was rooted by the Spaniards who will assign a cabeza or a head to become the go-between, the dispenser of favors, the fixer between the Indios and the Spaniard, and use this position to amass power, wealth, and influence in a colonial Filipino society.
The nation's political elite relies in their mastery of the culture of patronage learned under Spanish and American colonialism to keep themselves in power up to the present.
Parcelation of resources. The Philippine political elites parcellated the resources of indigenous people in Mindanao to their appointed cronies, transnational corporations, and local warlords. First is the Bukidnon Sugar Industries Corporated or Bosco in Paitan of Quezon, Bukidnon, and also the Agus hydropower plants in Lanao. Conflict of affairs between Philippine Constitution. Article 12, Section 5, which declares that the state shall protect the rights of indigenous cultural communities to their ancestral lands to ensure their economic, social, and cultural well-being. Yet, in Article 12, Section 2 of the same Constitution states that all lands of the public domain, waters, minerals, coal, petroleum, and other mineral oils of sources of potential energy, fisheries, forests, or timber, wildlife, flora and fauna, and other natural resources are owned by the state with the exception of agricultural lands. All other natural resources shall not be ceded. EPRA Law. The Indigenous People Rights Act of 1997, or the EPRA Law of the Philippines, signed by then the Philippine President Fidel V. Ramos on July 28, 1997.
At the heart of the EPRA law, following the draft promulgations of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP, from 1983 and 1995 until it was adopted overwhelmingly in a UN General Assembly in 2007, is the insistence on the principle of securing free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, of indigenous communities when third-party entities such as business or government deal with the group. The law also granted on the right of these communities to the ancestral domain claims and tasked a government entity, the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, or NCIP, to oversee these processes.
Even after 2 years with the IPLO, the indigenous people was still not near the stated aims of the law. The state was tasked to guarantee the full enjoyment of the human rights and freedoms of these marginalized groups, and yet the specter of social, political, and economic displacement continues to haunt indigenous communities. In an unfortunate development, these hard-won mechanisms of redress, such as the law, have actually become instruments for the continued marginalization and, in many cases, provided the imperative for the series of extrajudicial killings and forced evacuation of indigenous leaders and their communities. Extrajudicial killings on the indigenous people. The case of the killing of the anti-mining Matigsalog tribal leader Jimmy Ligoyon of Dao, Quezon Bukidnon, reveals the deadly consequences when the very mechanisms that are supposed to guarantee redress, that provide the very imperatives for the murder of indigenous leader and the displacement of the whole community. Ligoyon was shot at close range with an Armalite rifle in front of his children by known paramilitary leader Alde or Butsoy Salusod on March 5, 2012. According to witnesses, Salusad belongs to the new Indigenous People Army for reform Nepal paramilitary group with strong military backing and who stand behind an ancestral domain claim that seeks to open up 52,000 has of indigenous land to large-scale mining. Operation Siguyo was killed for his resistance to the paramilitary groups designed to force the community Ligoyon leads to acquiesce to the planned expansion of San Cristo mining in the area. Same stories has also been told by other Southerners of Mindanao about the killings of members of the indigenous community because of the resistant cases of big businesses with the backing of the Philippine military and conscripted paramilitary groups sponsoring ancestral domain claims
that enabled by a law have brought murder and anguish to once peaceful indigenous communities. These have brought murder and anguish to have peaceful indigenous communities. These cases indicate the bastardization of formal mechanisms established to suppose protect the interests of indigenous groups but end up in reality as platforms of their historical and continuing political, economic, and social displacement.